Okay, so we're diving into Palm Bay today, and pretty big moment for them. They just selected their new city manager.
Yeah, a new city manager is a big deal for any city. It kind of sets the tone for everything that follows, so it'll be interesting to see what direction they go.
Right, it really is. And we've got this whole stack of documents, city council meetings, minutes, candidate applications, even some news reports. So,
Wow, it's a pretty good collection.
yeah. So our goal is to kind of sift through this whole thing and figure out, how did this decision happen? Who is this guy, Matthew Morton? And maybe even look at some of the other candidates and see what they were all about, see what ideas they brought to the table.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, so the first thing that jumps out is, the previous city manager position opens up, right? And the council pretty quickly puts together this recruitment plan back in December 2024. They appointed Scott Morgan as the interim city manager to kind of, hold down the fort while they searched for a permanent replacement. And they were very specific. They said his contract would run through April 30th, 2025, with a possible extension if needed.
I see. So they were already planning for the long haul, even with the interim position.
Exactly. They were thinking ahead. And the way they defined the ideal candidate, it's really telling. They wanted someone with a lot of experience, obviously, but also someone who is really strong on fiscal responsibility, which, maybe hints at some past financial issues the city might have dealt with.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, fiscal responsibility is always important, but it becomes even more crucial if a city has had some financial struggles in the past.
Yeah, and they also really stressed the importance of transparency and community engagement.
Yeah.
They wanted someone who would be open and honest with the people of Palm Bay.
It sounds like they were looking for someone who wouldn't just be a manager, but a real leader, someone who could connect with the community and build trust.
Absolutely. And on top of just, general experience, they wanted someone who was a member of the ICMA, the International City County Management Association, and preferably with the ICMA CM credential, which is like their top level certification.
Right, so they weren't messing around.
Yeah,
They wanted someone with the best possible qualifications.
exactly. So they put the word out, and by the end of February, they had 114 applications, which is
Oh, 114, that's a lot.
that's a ton. So to help sift through all of that, they brought in two retired city managers from the Florida City and County Management Association Senior Advisor Program.
Oh, that's a smart move, using that kind of experience to help narrow down the field.
Exactly. And these guys volunteered their time to do an initial review, just looking at the applications and seeing who met the basic requirements.
So they were like the first line of defense, weeding out anyone who wasn't a good fit.
Right. And from those 114 applications, they identified 16 candidates that they thought were, the best of the bunch, the cream of the crop.
Okay, so now we're getting down to the serious contenders.
Yep. So the city council takes over from there. And on March 20th, they hold a meeting to review 8 of those 16 candidates.
8 candidates, that's still a pretty big pool.
Yeah, but, they're getting closer. And then on March 29th, they dedicate an entire Saturday to interviewing the final 6 candidates.
Wow, a whole Saturday. That shows how seriously they were taking this.
Oh, yeah. They wanted to make sure they had plenty of time to really get to know these finalists.
Makes sense. And ultimately, they chose Matthew Morton, right?
They did. It was a 4-1 vote, so not completely unanimous, but, a pretty strong majority.
Yeah, that's a pretty decisive win. I wonder what it was about Mr. Morton that impressed them so much.
Well, they said publicly that he just stood head and shoulders above the rest during the interviews.
I'd love to know what he said that made such an impact.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, luckily we have some clues from the meeting minutes. They captured some of his key points. And one thing that really stood out was his emphasis on transparency and accountability.
That's always a good sign, especially in local government.
Right. And he had this great quote. He said, "Without accountability, we're not being honest with ourselves."
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. It really gets to the heart of what good governance is all about.
Exactly. And he also talked about the importance of developing talent within the city's existing workforce, investing in the people who are already there.
That's smart. I mean, those are the people who really know the city and its challenges.
Yeah. And he was also very clear about his own personal integrity. He said, "I won't be bullied by any council member. My integrity is more important than my job."
That's a bold statement. You have to admire that kind of conviction.
Yeah, it really shows that he's not afraid to stand up for what he believes in.
So he's not going to be a pushover, that's for sure.
Definitely not. And on top of all that, he described himself as hungry and a hard charger, as someone who's ready to hit the ground running.
So he's got the experience, the integrity, and the energy. Sounds like a pretty good package.
Yeah, he does seem like a very strong candidate. Now, one of the other finalists was actually Greg Link, who used to be the city manager of Palm Bay.
Oh, wow. So he already knew the ins and outs of the city.
Exactly. And during his interview, he brought up some really interesting points. For example, he questioned whether the city was being efficient with its staffing levels. Did they have the right number of people in the right places?
Hmm. That's a tough question, but an important one to ask.
Yeah, and he also raised some questions about the status of a road bond referendum, whether it was on track and whether it was really the best way to address the city's infrastructure needs.
So he was really digging into the details, trying to identify areas where things could be improved.
Exactly. And he also talked a lot about smart growth strategies, things like staggered start times for businesses to reduce traffic congestion, and even using artificial intelligence to optimize traffic flow.
Those are some pretty innovative ideas. I
Yeah.
mean, traffic is a huge problem in a lot of cities, so anything that can help address that is definitely worth exploring.
Right. And he also shared this story from early in his career about a really difficult customer service experience and how he went above and beyond to help this person. It was a way of showing his dedication to public
So
service.
he's not just a numbers guy, he actually cares about people.
Yeah, it definitely came across that way. Now, ultimately, the council went with Mr. Morton, but it sounds like they had some really qualified candidates to choose from.
It does. And it's interesting that the department heads who met with the candidates overwhelmingly preferred Mr. Morton.
Right. They really seem to like him, and, they're the ones who are going to be working with him day to day, so their opinion definitely matters.
Absolutely. And Councilman Langevin, who initially favored a different candidate, was really impressed by Mr. Morton's preparation. He said that Mr. Morton had spent a lot of time learning about the city before the interview.
Wow. Yeah, that really shows initiative, and it makes sense that it would make a big impression.
Yeah, it shows that he's not just going through the motions, he's actually invested in this job.
Exactly. And Mayor Medina also praised Mr. Morton's expertise in development, both commercial and light industrial, and his understanding of city government as a whole.
So they really seem to feel like he had the right mix of skills and experience for the job.
They did. And it's interesting to look at some of the interview questions they asked. It wasn't just about policy and management style. They also asked things like who their favorite founding father was.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. I wonder why they asked that.
Yeah, it's not the kind of question you'd normally expect in a job interview, but maybe they were trying to get a sense of the candidate's values, their philosophical underpinnings.
Right, like what kind of principles do they believe in?
Exactly. And Mr. Morton said his favorite founding father was George Washington.
Hmm. Interesting choice.
Yeah. And they also asked them about their philosophy on taxation and government spending. Where do they stand on those big issues?
Right, because those are things that a city manager has to deal with all the time.
And they wanted to know about their plans for the first 90 days in office. What would their top priorities be?
That's a crucial period.
Yeah.
It sets the tone for the entire administration.
Exactly. And some of the council members had very specific things they wanted to see addressed. For example, one council member wanted to make sure they filled those key director positions in public works and economic development.
Right, because those are essential functions for any city.
And this council member also wanted to see plans for a park in Southeast Palm Bay and for redeveloping the Majors golf course.
So they were looking for someone who could make things happen, who could take these ideas and turn them into reality.
Exactly. And another council member really emphasized the importance of diversifying the city's tax base. Not relying too heavily on any one source of revenue.
That's smart.
Yeah.
It makes the city more resilient in the face of economic changes.
Right. And they specifically asked the candidates how they would achieve that in their first 90 days.
So they weren't just looking for long-term vision. They wanted to see some concrete short-term action.
Absolutely. And one candidate mentioned the idea of working with developers who specialize in those hard-to-develop properties, the ones that most developers shy away from.
That's an interesting approach. It could be a way to unlock some hidden potential in the city.
Yeah, and he even gave some examples from Southern California and Miami-Dade County.
So he's clearly thinking outside the box.
He is, and there was also some discussion about one candidate's previous experience as the city manager and how he had left that position rather abruptly.
Oh, that's always a red flag. You have to wonder what happened there.
Yeah, the council definitely wanted to get to the bottom of that.
Makes sense. So after all of that, they finally chose Matthew Morton. Let's talk about him a bit more. What's his background like?
Well, he's got over 25 years of experience as a public administrator, and he's worked in multiple states.
Wow, 25 years. That's impressive.
Yeah.
So he's not new to this game.
Definitely not. And he's been the city manager in Palm Coast, Florida, which means he's already familiar with the state and how things work here.
That's a big plus. It can take a while to get up to speed in a new state.
Yeah, and he's also worked in several cities in Washington state and even in Michigan.
So he's got a really diverse range of experience. He's seen it all.
He has. And his education is pretty impressive, too. He's got a Master of Public Administration in Finance and a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering.
Wow, that's a great combination. He's got the financial know-how and the technical expertise.
Exactly. And he's got a track record of implementing innovative initiatives. In Palm Coast, he spearheaded some smart city projects and was a key player in launching the Palm Coast Medinanex Health Innovation District.
Smart cities and health innovation, those are some hot areas right now.
Yeah.
It sounds like he's on the cutting edge.
He is, and during his time in Washington state, he rebuilt departments, improved morale, and secured over 30 grants.
30 grants.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You must be really good at finding funding.
Yeah, he definitely seems to have a knack for it. And on top of all that, he's also the founder of Flagler Veterans Village, which is a nonprofit organization that provides transitional housing and support for veterans.
Wow. So he's really committed to his community. That's inspiring.
It is. And he's also a partner at Perihelion Group Consulting, where he advises local governments on land acquisition and development strategy.
So he's keeping his finger on the pulse of what's happening in the field.
Exactly. And he's continued his education as well.
Yeah.
He's got credentials from the Harvard JFK School and the University of South Dakota, in addition to his degree from Central Washington University.
But he's a lifelong learner. That's always a good sign.
It is. And, he even joked during his interview that his long-term goal is to retire in 20 years and have a golf course bathroom named after him.
Uh-huh. That's great. I like that. He doesn't take himself too seriously.
Yeah, he seems like a really down-to-earth guy.
So overall, it sounds like Palm Bay has made a really good choice with Matthew Morton.
I think so. He seems like he's got the experience, the vision, and the personality to be a very successful city manager.
And it's clear that the city council put a lot of thought and effort into this decision.
They did. They really wanted to make sure they found the right person for the job.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the selection process.
It has. And for you, our listener, we encourage you to think about what aspects of Mr. Morton's background or the selection process stand out to you, and what questions you might have about his vision for the city.
What do you think Palm Bay will look like in 5 or 10 years under his leadership?
That's a great question to ponder, and we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.